different reply. For we do use the name of the picture's real subject matter to refer to its depiction. We say, pointing to a portrait on the wall, that is Cairo. But how can we do so? How are we entitled to do so? And what is the real nature of objects in dreams or depictions? Engaged emancipation. And it's nice to quote Wendy Donegan, who was a previous Bose lecturer here. So in her abridgment, Queen Leela was the wife of King Padma. When he died, Leela prayed to the goddess Saraswati, who explained to her that in a former birth, Padma and Leela had been a sage named Vasishta and his wife Arundhati. She also told Leela that the king had now been reborn as King Vidurata. Since Leela had not been reborn, the king had taken a new wife whose name just happened to be Leela. Saraswati used her magic powers to transport herself and Queen Leela through the air to the palace where King Vidurata lived. Invisible, they saw him in his court. When a great battle took place, they went to the battlefield. There, Leela caught sight of the second Leela, who had the very same form as hers, like a reflection in a mirror. Puzzled at this, the first Leela asked Saraswati how there could be another woman just like her. The goddess replied with a long lecture on the projection of mental images from inside to outside, as in dreams. These words were overheard by the second Leela, who spoke to Saraswati and said, "In my dreams I've often spoken with the goddess of wisdom, and she looked exactly as you look to me right now." The first Leela said to Vidurata, "I am Leela, your queen from a former life. This second Leela is your queen by my art, produced for you by me. She's just a reflection." So Saraswati, as Daniel Galue might have put it, has Leela cut in to the virtual reality in which Vidurata lives as the heteronym of her deceased husband Padma. She's cut in on a personal surveillance circuit, and so had she been visible, it would have appeared, as Ashton put it, as if a god dropped down and started talking to you. What does she see? That she is already there on an empathy circuit, that a heteronym is present and indeed even has her own name. She declares herself to have created this second Leela, who is, she says, her own reflection. In one of those metaphysical backflips for which the Yoga Vasishta is so well loved, this second Leela says that she has seen a second Saraswati in her dreams, thereby insinuating that her second Leela's claim on reality is just as solid as that of Leela the First. It would be as if the author of Notes for My Memory of Master Cairo drops himself into the get-together of heteronyms in order to witness Fernando Pessoa, the second Pessoa, as it were, holding forth. Leela's reflection is called Leela, specifically second Leela, just as a portrait of Cairo is also called Cairo, and Cairo imagined or dreamt is still called Cairo. Our problem is to understand how the same name is used twice. We do the same in theatre too, saying, here is Shakuntala, even as an actor playing Shakuntala enters from the wings. In neither case is it plausible to say that we're suffering under an illusion, that we misperceive the painting as its subject matter or the actor as the character. We know full well that it is a painting, and we're happy to comment on the painting's style, brushwork, provenance, and so on, as on the quality of an actor's performance. It's become customary to say instead that we see Cairo in the painting, and seeing in requires that we attend both to what's depicted and to the depicting material itself. That's Richard Volheim's concept of seeing in. A virtual realist such as David Chalmers will make sense of the double use in the following way. They will say that what's seen within a simulation are simulacra. There's a simulacrum, second Leela, and there's an object outside the simulation, Leela, and these are different objects because one is made of digital information, or else whatever stuff it is that dreams are made of, and the other is made of carbon molecules. The different objects are, however, closely related insofar as one is a virtual simulacrum of the other, and that's how we can use the same name twice. The semantic rule is something like the name n of x can be used to refer to a simulacrum of x. The virtual realist Lambert Wiesing describes virtual objects as artificial presences. That's the name of his book, Artificial Presence. And he says that a virtual reality is only given if the image no longer serves as a medium for referring to something absent, but rather if the image becomes a medium by which a particular kind of object is produced and presented, an object that is exclusively visible and yet, like a ghost, acts as if it had substance and the properties of a substance. The same is true, according to the philosopher of art Bence Nane, of pictures. In a picture, he claims, there's an encoded object, a virtual object, which is not identical to the subject matter of the picture, the real object the picture depicts. So for all these thinkers, there's an entity, be it a virtual object, an artificial presence, or an encoded object, which serves as a simulacrum of X, and to which the name of X can therefore be applied. The virtual realist says that we use the same name twice because the virtual object, whether in an immersive simulation or in a two-dimensional picture, is a stand-in for an actual object. Now that is, I suggest, exactly the kind of view Vasishta wants Rama to reject. There is just one Leela inside and outside the simulation. where here the simulation is a Saraswati-generated glimpse of the afterlife. Leela and second Leela are two uses of a name to refer to one and the same entity, Leela. This is partially to agree with Jerry Valberg when he writes that the human being I am was part of the world internal to my dream the other night, and that world is discrete from the world to which this human being belongs. Still, it's correct to say that I, that very human being, was in my dream the other night, just as it's correct to say that my daughter was in that dream. Valberg, however, muddies the water by importing talk of different worlds. And for this reason, his view is confused. A world can only be, if anything, a proprietary domain of objects. And so this talk working? A world can only be, if anything, a proprietary domain of objects. And so this talk of different worlds imports a commitment to a layered conception of reality. Fundamental physics has elementary particles. Mechanics has ordinary middle-sized objects. Biology has plants and animals. The social sciences have social groups and communities, and so on. Hardly a matter of superficial puzzlement, as Valberg claims, it's now an outright impossibility that the very same object could show up in two discrete worlds. The Yoga Vasishta is, in a similar vein, traditionally depicted as, I quote Shankar Nair, teaching a variety of esoteric knowledge meant to liberate an aspirant from the vagaries of the phenomenal world. But we must reject a popular, if overly simplistic, reading of the philosophical message of the work. The simple reading would have it that what the text demonstrates, or is intended to demonstrate, idealism is true. For consider the story of Lavana, who enters a magician-induced simulation in which he lives in a village among villagers for many years. On emerging from the dream, Lavana sets out in search of the village and the villagers among whom he had in the simulation lived for so long. To his and our astonishment, he does indeed discover it. The village exists outside the simulations as much as inside. It was not a merely phenomenal world. The metaphysical claim made by Vasishta in this story has to do with the identity of objects. What it claims is that virtual objects, the objects within a simulation, are identical to normal objects without the simulation. It's an affirmation of what we might call the thesis of trans-simulation object identity. Pessoa is clearly on Vasishta's side. He writes, "This new reality, that of a strange forest, makes its appearance without effacing the reality of my warm alcove, and that tremulous, transparent landscape clearly belongs to them both." I've already quoted that. The presence of the same objects in both of two fields of experience is what Pessoa calls intersectionism. A tempting option is to associate each of the two uses of a name with a distinct root to its single referent. When Gottlob Frege introduced the concept of a mode of presentation into the philosophy of language, His aim was to explain how it could be that the identity between Hesperus and Phosphorus, the morning star and the evening star, both of which are none other than the planet Venus, how that identity can be informative. If they refer to the same object, why isn't it simply true a priori that one is identical to the other? It isn't a priori, Frege pointed out, because the same object is given twice over under two. Yet Frege will only help us so far in solving the mystery of second Leela. For consider again Lovener. He was certainly surprised to discover the village, the very same village he had got to know so well while under the magician's spell. But his surprise wasn't the result of discovering that the village he's now seeing and the village he got to know so well were, after all, one and the same village. He knew that from the first moment he came across it. Indeed, he went in search of it. He didn't think that here's a village and there was a village, and only then discover that they are one and the same village. That wasn't the source of his surprise. What surprised him was that the village should be here at all. How is it possible that my village, the village in which I lived so many years, should be here? It's the same for Leela. When Saraswati gives her a peek into the afterlife, she is certainly surprised to find Leela there. But other things which appeared in her glimpse of the afterlife are also in the here and now, and marvels at Saraswati's artistic power, Maya, which is such that the same high hills, the same spacious forests of palm and hintala leaves are both on the inside as well as outside myself, to quote. She tries to rationalize it to herself by likening her new and alarming situation to the workings of a mirror, the very same objects which are outside being reflected. If I see the sun reflected in a window pane, I might be mistaken about its location in space, but it's certainly the sun I'm seeing. Nor is the surprise Leela experiences akin to the one John Perry experienced when he tracked a trail of sugar on a supermarket floor, pushing his shopping trolley up and down the aisles in a hunt for the shopper with a torn bag of sugar, only for him to finally realize that he himself was the shopper he was trying to chase down. Perry's famous example. Certainly it can be startling to discover that a person presented under some description is, after all, oneself. But that wasn't what startled Leela, or indeed the other protagonists of the stories in the Yoga of Vasishta. Their question wasn't, is this the same village? Are these the same trees? Is this me? Their question was, how can this village be here? How can I be here? They're already, as it's sometimes said, immune to any error. What is it then that causes Leela to be surprised? It's precisely the discovery that there is only one world, not two. Lovener had thought, on emerging from the magician's spell, that he had been taken to a world of phenomenal illusion, a world whose contents don't really exist. The lesson he's taught is that this was never the case. He wasn't taken to another world, but to the same world, differently made present. He hadn't known that how the world is made present matters just as much as what is made present. He had taken it for granted that there's just one correct way to have a world in view, just one correct way of interrogating reality. What surprises him is that there's more than one correct way to have the world in view. Lavana led 2 lives, one under the magician's spell and the other free of it, and the experiential quality of each of those lives, as manifested, for example, in the sense of time passing, is linked with their different ways of apprehending the world. Matters are exactly the same, and perhaps more explicitly so, with Pessoa. Pessoa as Cairo leads one sort of life, while Pessoa as Camposh leads another. It isn't surprising or informative that there's one Pessoa here. What's really surprising is the discovery that it's so possible to live a plurality of lives. In a way, this is the quintessence of Pessoa's philosophy, that it makes something explicit, that it makes explicit something easily overlooked in what it is to lead a life, that one can lead a life by leading a life in plural. Recouching the matter in terms of imagination rather than celestial intervention, we might say that Leela, i.e. first Leela, imagines herself, i.e. second Leela, at the side of her husband in the afterlife. The oddness of the story comes from something else she imagines. She imagines seeing herself beside her husband in the afterlife. That is to say that she, Leela the imagining subject, imagines herself, Leela the immersed subject, seeing herself, Leela, an object in the imagined scene, beside her subject, her husband, in the afterlife. When Leela imagines seeing herself, it is as if she's present twice over, and that's the reason for all the talk of first and second Leela. Leela thinks, in Saraswati's simulation, I am Leela seeing myself, Leela, standing beside my husband. Here we have the same name used twice, without there being 2 Leelas. It's been used a first time to refer to Leela imagined from the inside, the one at the center of a perspective on the scene. And it's been used the second time to refer to Leela imagined seen from the outside, standing beside Vidurata. Leela's presence then is a surprise at encountering herself located somewhere other than at the perspectival center. In Pessoan terms, second Leela is a heteronym of Leela, and in imagining herself, seeing herself, Leela pluralizes herself by living 2 lives in parallel. So I'm coming to the end now. Oh, my laptop is, just need to. Well, if it's possible to imagine seeing the world in different ways, then it seems to follow that one's way of seeing the world is a contingent feature of oneself. This realization might lead one to wonder if it would be possible to do away with every way of seeing the world altogether. Vasishta's not unreasonable suggestion is that one then hits a bedrock of consciousness which underwrites any way of seeing. He calls it Chid Akasha, cosmic consciousness. The very lengthy 6th book of the Yoga Vasishta, the Nirvana Prakarana, is an extended eulogy to this state of mind. Some of Pessoa's remarks make it seem as if he again sides with Vasishta here. He talks of being a medium and a meeting place for the heteronyms, writing, "Today I have no personality. I've divided all my humanness among the various authors whom I've served as literary executor. Today I'm the meeting place of a small humanity that belongs only to me. I subsist as a kind of medium of myself, but I'm less real than the others, less substantial, less personal, and easily influenced by them all." Again, he writes, these are quotations in the Book of Disquiet, "I created a non-existent coterie, placing it all in a framework of reality. I ascertained the influences at work and the friendships between them. I listened in myself to their discussions and divergent points of view. And in all of this, it seems that I who created them all, was the one who was least there." To think of oneself as a meeting place with no personality of its own is to think that there's a sort of self-awareness more primitive than that of having an individuated point of view, which I've elsewhere called a sort of forumnal self-awareness. Zeno Wendler approaches the same idea when he asks, quote, "What are these eyes that we can shed and don at will as so many costumes, and what is this eye that performs the change?" Answering that, as regards the eye that performs the change, quote, "Here the eye does not pick out an object, a thing in the field of consciousness. It marks the ultimate subject, the transcendental self." So, in conclusion, Vasishta's argument implies that there is no life off stage. Waking is not to be thought of in terms of leading a life out of role, but just as one more form of acting. There's no tribunal of experience. Waking life is one life among many, not a source of ultimate verification. There are many ways of having a world in view, and no one is best or better. This is, I believe, what the Yoga Vasishta wants to teach us. Appealing once more to a theatrical metaphor, the text asserts that mind is an actor whose stage is the world, watched on by its troupe. As there is just one stage, so there is just one world, a single world in which the mind takes up its various parts. Vasishta's argument is that one is always in role, that wakefulness is just another role alongside other modalities of immersed experience. I think that Pessoa agrees, especially when he talks of, quotes Fernando Pessoa himself as just one heteronym among the others. All life is, in the end, a life of self-estrangement. With that, I'll conclude. Thank you very much for your patience.
Thank you so much, Professor. Now I open the floor for any questions. Yes, Roshni. Professor, would you mind answering the questions from here?
Yeah.
Who would like to go for the question first? Yes.
Thank you very much for that very stimulating talk. I was wondering, in this constant movement between immersion and distance that you described, firstly, what are the points of stability between the various worlds? And do you think that in order to have this immersion, one needs a pre-existing distance as the condition of immersion? So that would be
the point of stability is this idea of a stage, that in all our different immersed persona, we are acting on a stage, and so the stage is a metaphor for I call it the forum, or the kind of the stable point, which is a form of self-consciousness that underlines and undergrids. Every heteronym is a personalized form of self-consciousness. It's an I that's a particular individuated subject of experience. But underlying that, there's a different kind of self-awareness, which we can also refer to using the first person, but it's like the stage. It's like the stage, so it's impersonal, ground, point of stability. Now, your other question was whether we need a distance in order to have immersion. I think that's the view that these authors are kind of rejecting, that all life is immersed life. There is no stepping out of immersion. There's no kind of Archimedean, life outside our immersed life. But what we can have is a plurality of forms of immersion, which we can juxtapose them, but we can never step out of role altogether.
So particularly from your conclusion, your last, what you said, would that mean that there's just a kind of, in other words, how does one become aware of oneself as immersed? That moment of differentiation, where does that emerge from? And is that presupposed in the possibility of any kind of representation of the world as a meaningful world? So the as structure of meaning, if you were to call it that, does that presuppose an as if that has to after all, if there's complete immersion, there would be no possibility of distancing, right? So there has to be some differential element between the various modes of immersion, or the various stages, as it were, in which we are immersed.
You see, my takeaway from the story of Second Leela is that you have immersion and distance all within the simulation. You have Leela imagining seeing herself at the side of her dead husband. So she's there twice. She's there